All right. Well, we are live. So, welcome to another episode of the Athletic Transformation Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Taylor Davidson, the founder of Football Entangled. So, I'm very excited to have him on the podcast today. So, Taylor, thanks for coming on, man. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, man, my pleasure. Happy to be here. And thank you for having me on. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely, man. Me too. So one of the things I just wanted to start off with actually is to give you some credit for is that Taylor has some very unique views and opinions on kind of health performance training in the football world. And so actually me and him agree on a lot of things, but there are different things that we kind of disagree on too, or have differences of opinions, some of the stuff that I wanted to dive into at the podcast today. But people that have differing opinions don't always get together to kind of talk about those and flush those out actually on a podcast. So I wanted to give you credit for kind of coming on and be willing to talk about that stuff. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, my pleasure. I mean, it's always, of course, I'm sure people online will love to hear, kind of debate or conflict or controversy about this or that. And it's always good to kind of push the push the barriers of what assumptions you have out there about, training and health and life in general.
I love it, dude. So one of the unique things about your stuff specifically is there's tons of strength programs for soccer and technical skill development and all of these different things. But football entangled is one of the first or one of the few that I've seen that really kind of hammers home the health side of things, the more of like a holistic approach as more of the foundation and real like the baseline. There's lots of ones that will touch on sleep and different things like that, but that's really a like a staple or a pillar for you guys is actually getting the human being itself functioning in a good state in a good environment. And so I'm just curious kind of how or why that's become such a foundation for you guys, why you hit that so much harder than other people in particular.
Well, great question, mate. And it's kind of one of the interesting things for me is like, for example, I played D1 soccer here in California for Cal State Fullerton, and we have like one of the best baseball programs in the country. I think we have like the highest number of like pro MLB players from of all the colleges in America. The highest number of pro baseball players are from Cal State Fullerton. And my point is that there's a bunch of money in the physio department, in the strength department. We have amazing facilities, big stadiums, all that stuff. And like every weekend, there's scouts from the Angels and from all the pro baseball teams at on campus every weekend. So we have these great facilities. And I always wondered, my physio, why is my physio eating microwave burritos every day? And why is my gym coach pale as my t-shirt and has never seen sunlight, and he's eating a little box of broccoli and fried rice and ramen, you know, out of a package. I never understood why someone who is so dedicated to their craft, which obviously for him it's in the strength world, powerlifting, that kind of thing, such dedication, but then ignores such other important things that are like just next door, because obviously if you're into lifting and being in the gym and stuff, obviously your physique, your body is important to you, but then you totally ignore these other, let's say, low hanging fruit like sunlight and grounding and real food and fresh air, like just like as a basic thing. It's the jump to get to those other things is like so far, and for me I just never understood why. And like, for example, there is a bunch of mainstream research about how UV sunlight or UV light in sunlight, how it affects composition of the muscle fibers. And yet every single gym in the whole world is in a basically like in a basement, in a dungeon without any natural light coming in, you know.
Yeah, 100%. We got to get you out to the Bali time chamber. You'd like that one. That one's open air. But it is no, it's a very valid and very interesting point that yeah, the most of the people in the places of authority that are talking to that are speaking to these athletes, whether it's the people that like are political health representatives from a like a global health perspective, how remarkably unhealthy all of them look at whatever country you want to look at, or the classic strength and conditioning coach who's yeah gigantic but can't do any of the athletic feats that the athletes he's training are actually able to do. And how interesting, yeah, we can get kind of pigeonholed into, yeah, we have this one specific thing that we get very, very good at or very interested in, and can ignore the things that like you say, are right next door. So is it more from the athlete's perspective of the people that are talking to them and are preaching to them, or just it's not an emphasis for them, so it doesn't become an emphasis to the athlete themselves?
Well, yeah, I mean, it kind of echoes back to their it echoes back to their education, in mainstream school, even the biggest schools for sports science, uh, kinesiology, all these things, they don't teach you about sunlight and about the mitochondria and grounding and health and bacteria and viruses and how the body actually works and detox and digestion and all these things. It's obviously it's how our modern system of education works, where like you said, you get pigeonholed into your certain thing, and you get so educated that you think you know everything, but then you literally know nothing about something just next door.
It is interesting too if we think about like performance as like a pyramid, and like the very, very top of that is actually performing in a game, the high level stuff that we're doing with sprinting and jumping and cutting and plyometrics and all the things. Like it seems like that little tiny top of the pyramid is where all of the effort and energy and resources go into and studying in sports science and things like that. But we miss that foundation, that base of the pyramid, which is just basic health, basic physiology. And it's starting to shift very slowly. People like Huberman and stuff like
Mm.
biohacking space is becoming a little bit more common. But yeah, it does seem surprising how much energy and resources go into that top of the pyramid, and how much basic stuff and just benefit there is from doing some of those basic things like grounding, like sunlight. So within that space, what are some of the basics? I know you touch on them a ton with your content, but some of the simple, most low hanging fruit that could benefit athletes that they're not doing already. Like where are these guys missing? Where are
Mhm.
these guys going wrong?
Well, just like a funny story. I don't want to name him because I don't want to like roast him too much. But I had like a pro client that was like that was a national team player for a big team, or for a big country in South America, and he had some injuries. And I would go, or like my buddy that works for me, he would tell me, "Hey, I found that this player has an esports team, and that he's on Twitch every night, and he streams until like 2 a.m." And so I'm like, "Well, what are we doing here? Why am I like, don't waste my time. If you're gonna be a pro player and have a serious career and make up and all this money, and then you can't go to bed on time, what's the point of like arguing over what's the point of arguing over what kind of like training method you should do if you can't even sleep on time, because like your sleep is the biggest performance enhancing drug there is. And if you don't take care of that, and like you're asking, for sleep, obviously going to bed on time is important, but a big focus is the quality of your sleep. And people don't realize that the sunlight in the morning creates melatonin in the body, which then is released by darkness at night. So if you don't get sunlight in the morning, your sleep will suffer as a consequence. And so like the basic thing is guys need to go to bed on time, and they need to have a proper light environment at night, and ideally in the morning wake up on time, because if you don't wake up until 9 a.m., 10 a.m., you're missing out on about 2 to 3 hours of really important sunlight, which is different than the midday sunlight, which is higher UV. In the morning, you have the blue light, the red light, and a higher concentration of infrared light that has a different effect than the midday light on the body, especially because the body makes certain hormones as at 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 only certain times of the day. So if you miss that window, you miss that window until the following day, and you won't just make up for it later by doing some supplements or doing this or that.
How is it? Because some of that, I think more of like high school athletes and stuff like that. Like a lot of them almost know that. It's just one of those things that it's so boring. It's so unsexy. They're like, yeah, yeah, I need to sleep. But like, what's the
Oh, I
training
know.
plan I can do? What's the supplement that I can take? So as a lot of times it's almost a just like a behavior change or like trying to get them to buy in and stuff like that. So that like 16, 17-year-old that just wants to play like Fortnite all night as well and stuff like that and just can't be bothered with a good night's sleep or waking up early. Like, how do you cross that bridge and have that conversation to because it seems like less like an education thing. They know they should be. It's just one of those that they undervalue the importance of or they
Mhm.
just won't do.
Yeah, that's a good question, Zach. It's and obviously, and honestly, that was me in high school. I was up till like 2 a.m.
Yeah.
playing FIFA, and I regret it. I mean, I wish I was in bed earlier. I'd probably be taller, and I probably have like have my hair longer, and you know, for me, one of the biggest things to get buy-in is to make them buy in. People don't value the things unless they spend money on it. And that's one of the tricks of human psychology. And um, I forget who this was, but there was a guy that had a bunch of courses about like uh, courses about like real estate, and he's like, this method works. Like I've like done it myself. It makes so much money. He put the course out for free online. No one used it. Then he charged 1K for it and everyone's doing it, you know? So it's like the kind of the path of least resistance. You have to get guys to buy in with something that has tangible value and more or less that's money. After that, you know, once guys taste how good it feels to wake up every morning with strong libido and feel and feeling refreshed, it's hard to go back. So the big thing is a lot of guys are so used to feeling like shit. The, they're so used to waking up feeling groggy and then having coffee to cover up their poor lifestyle and other supplements, other things. And it's just trying to help them realize that your whole life you've been eating hot dogs. Here's a ribeye, you know.
Love that. You're speaking to the crowd on that, or the speaking to the choir on that one.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and it's very true. Like I mean, all the studies they've done with wine, right? They give people three glasses of wine that are all the same, and they just tell them the price, and they think one's tastes better than the other, literally just based off of the price. So yeah, that having some skin in the game does definitely seem to make a difference, and even just that feeling of like you talked about, of actually try it, taste it. Like give me 2 weeks, like just try 2 weeks, and then if you want to piss off and go back to doing your own thing. But yeah,
Yeah.
once you actually get a little bit of taste of that, so I want to kind of move on a little bit just because I know the physiology stuff is a lot of it's guys like Huberman and stuff like that. People are talking about that. There is starting to be some information on that out there. The next place I wanted to go to is more of the like the technical skill side of things, like the actual the
Mhm.
game, like you call it. And you talk a lot about kids just playing more, which I think is massive. There's everything is so regimented these days. From the time that they're U10, they're just trying to play for like the U10 state championship instead of actually just playing and developing, and everything's hyper competitive. And you've got soccer mom screaming and doing all these
Yeah.
things. And so I know your philosophy around that is much more towards going back to a state of play and development, trying to do more things barefoot, trying to do things that are a little bit more free flowing. Can you tell me a little bit more just about what your how you see an optimal environment for players to develop and things like that?
Well, I think one of the major things is cross training and the dangers of early specialization, which is almost normal nowadays. You know, there's an amazing study by the NBA a few years ago talking about how of all the first round draft picks that were multi-sport athletes in high school, those guys had higher stat or higher points, higher games played, higher assists, all their stats went up. The guys that were only basketball in high school, they were injured more, played less games, had less points, all the stats were down. And obviously there's ways to like poke holes in that, but the message is there. When you play different sports, your body has to learn different patterns of movement. That expands what tools your body can use when it encounters things it's not used to, which for example could be a dangerous tackle on the football pitch. if you don't have a wide vocabulary of movement, you're very rigid in how your body can respond to this danger. And so for me, like me specifically, my family, everyone plays tennis. I was supposed to be a huge tennis player. Like my dad has a bunch of connections in that world, and I just didn't love it. I like at 13, I said no more tennis. Like I just don't love it at all. Just want to play football. But tennis, the skills of tennis translated over to defending a lot by understanding the spin of the ball and by my lateral movement. Like on almost all my teams, I was never the fastest, like running forward and back, but my lateral movement, I was the fastest guy on the team. And as a defender, that's very important. And so that's how cross training is basically like a cheat code, in my opinion, for development of your natural ability to move on the pitch.
Yeah, I agree a ton, dude. I think that that multi-sport thing is something that's so lost now, and it's probably more important these days now than ever, but because of the fact that yeah, every sport is now year round. It's now so much more regimented. Like we're just seeing these overuse injuries and just all of these things popping up more and more and more. And yeah, guys are overtrained and underdeveloped, I think, is a term that TJ has used a ton, that I think is very, very valuable. I've already thought about that for my kids of jujitsu, gymnastics, and track and field. We could get a little mix of that when they're coming
Nice.
up, like that movement literacy, like you said, just having that vocabulary, that base of athletic skill, just makes whatever sport you do want to pick and specialize in later on, makes that so much easier to pick up. Um, in terms of like actual technical training, though, whether it's at a
Yeah.
younger age, at a higher age, I know you've kind of bashed a lot of that stuff a decent amount in terms of just not being a fan of cone drills and just things like that, like the actual trainer. And I think there's some truth in that for sure. There's a lot of that is overplayed. Again, just making things, doing a lot of little movements, little technical stuff that doesn't actually get you better on the pitch. But I do wonder if there's some space for that at all. If there's some kind of baseline level of technical skill, like a prerequisite that you need to be able to be able play with both feet, for an example, to be able
Mhm.
to then go out and play on the court like you talk about and be able to who play five aside and do these things to develop more of the creativity. So I wonder what your kind of just stance is. Is there any value to that, to any of these people doing some of this technical stuff, or should it just really just play, leave that
Mhm.
stuff alone, and try and take care of it that way?
Well, my opinion is that the way that a footballer should view it is that your craft, and as a metaphor, we can say your your ability with a sword, as a warrior, playing the game, the the experience on the pitch, the 5v5, that is your ability to handle your sword, your skill at your craft. Cone drills and these other kind of ball mastery things, I view it as how you can sharpen your sword. So it literally doesn't matter how nice and sharp your sword is if you have no idea how to use it. And so for me, at least 80% of the time, the game is what has to be there. Learning to use the sword. Because a great warrior with a terrible sword is a lot better than a bad warrior with a good sword, you know? And I think that's what we see so much in America. We have these guys that are so technical doing these shooting drills and passing drills and cone drills. And then on the pitch, the kid from the kid from the barrio makes him look stupid. And that was my experience. I'm seeing this firsthand. I was the guy doing all the cone drills, and then there's a kid from a different area that's 5'2", weighs 140, and he's a starter, and then he signs an MLS. It's like there's something there that you guys are missing. And then on Instagram, like you have these guys that do these like specific cone drills where it's like off a wall, around the cone, do a turn, like do a backflip, and then it's like over a hurdle, and then it's like they do it like 1,000 times, and then they make a video of it, and and then obviously on Instagram that looks like cool, it looks good, like everyone's like, oh yeah, nice, 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 but Real Madrid are spending 70 million on a kid from the favela in Brazil, not on that guy. And so you have to, in our world, in our career, in our life, time is limited. So you have to use the time to the best of your ability that's most efficient as possible. And so the highest bang for your buck is playing small sided. Yes, uh, on a Friday afternoon, if you have no practice, go do some barefoot ball in the wall stuff, juggle off the wall, bring it back to you, control it, one touch, two touch, three touch, laces inside the foot, outside the foot. Like obviously sharpen your craft, make your touch sharp. But again, the bottom line comes to how can you use that sword?
I think that's a really good distinction. I like those 2 points of the sharpening the sword versus the using it, that comparison, and then also the time thing of like how to actually get the most bang for your buck. If you're a high school kid and you only get an hour a day to practice, like what's the best use of your time actually playing versus doing some technical stuff? And I think back to my development of the way that I came up and stuff like that. Like I think the only reason that I went places is because the majority of the stuff that I did was playing all the time. I trained with my team, I trained with the older team, I trained with like 4 different groups, like
Nice.
all in my area, and a lot of that was just small sided to goal, small sided possession, like not that much technical stuff. And I think that's probably where the majority of my development came from. So I do think that's a big thing. It can be hard for kids at the youth level, at least in the States, just because a lot of times they're kind of pigeonholed by whatever they have to do with their coach and with their team. But it is valuable to try and find the ways to get pick up in whatever it is that to get as much actual just playing as you can. I do think
Mm,
I do agree a lot with you. I think that's becoming less and less valued and probably more and more important in the game today. And especially again, like you and I are both based in the States, just seeing what's going on at the youth level and that sort of thing just feels like we're not doing as much as we could from a developmental standpoint. I think that's a big piece of it.
mhm. Yeah, like as a final point, just to say, if I had traded, let's say, like 100 hours of cone drills for 10 hours of indoor or 5v5, I'd be 10 times the player. That's always been my opinion.
And dude, just to that point too, like so I will give you credit too. One since I've started following you and stuff like that, I don't play as much as I used to. Obviously, it's not my main thing, doing business and all that stuff. But I started playing pickup with these local group of like Hispanic guys at like a park right by my house, and we're all playing barefoot out there. And some of the guys are 15, some of the guys are like 65. Like I think one guy was like a
Yeah,
pro like 100 years ago and stuff like that. And
yeah,
it's sick. It's a ton of fun. Like everyone's laughing, messing around, but like literally just playing like small sided, like actually playing barefoot. I noticed when I was doing that consistently, like it didn't take a lot of time, but just feeling much more like comfortable, sharper on the ball when I did then go and play like with my team that I was playing with or playing in boots and stuff like that. So I do think that's something that's very, very interesting, very, very valuable if you can find it. And maybe one of the things is it's hard to find these days, but it's valuable enough that it's worth creating. As like
mhm,
a side note, like Ben Patrick, who we'll talk about in a little bit, who is somebody that I'm a big fan of. Back when he was training in Clearwater, he had a group of like kind of high school basketball kids that he would like train with in the gym, but then they would also go and play like 1v1, like five aside, like actual basketball, and like they created that community themselves. And if getting better is something that you're serious about, like getting together with some of your friends and pulling them out of the house and going to like create that yourself. Like
yeah.
if that's not an environment that's readily available for you, like what can you do to create that yourself? Because it is something that's valuable and I think can be massive to like an athlete's development as an actual player.
Mhm.
So then, dude, some of the fun stuff I wanted to get into. So the gym stuff. So obviously, you're not a huge fan of gym work at all. Think there's better value to be gained from getting into more of the fascia stuff, which we'll get into in a little minute, and then just actually playing the game. And I think in a lot of instances, you're right. Like specifically with soccer, with football, like it's a hugely skill based, finesse based game compared to something like rugby or American football, where there's like a greater element of raw physicality and strength and speed and power that's needed compared to just the level of finesse that's needed to play high level football, soccer. But I'm just wondering, do you think there any instances where some strength stuff could be beneficial in terms of I work with a lot of guys coming back from ACL surgery and stuff like that, and their quad is atrophied, they have no strength, like we need to build some strength back that way. Is a lot of these the injuries and the training that we're doing, is it coming down to just all gym work being bad, or are we just doing bad gym work? Like I just wonder if there's like a distinction there and kind of what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, on your mention or on your mention of like surgeries and ACL stuff, I definitely do think people Well, first of all, people don't realize that ACL surgery does not fix what caused the ACL tear. ACL surgery is just reconstructing the ligament, which obviously is important. But the damage of the surgery itself, like you mentioned, that the atrophy and the anesthesia in on the nervous system, those things, you have to get back the muscle mass. So yes, I like traditional rehab, some forms of gym work to actually redevelop that muscle mass is very important, because I'm not going to have someone go play with like half a leg, you know. um on top of that, like there's some interesting work from a guy named like Gavin Macmillan and like Marv Amrunovich.
Mm,
Gavin Macmillan is from the Sports Science Lab, and like when they work with rugby athletes, American football athletes, sports where you're actually pushing an external force, it makes sense because there's weight involved. You're pushing an external force. In football or soccer, how often do we push an actual force? I mean, yes, we like body guys with our arms, and we kick a ball. That's about it. So, in terms of like, is all gym work bad? I think in a sport where you're actually pushing external force, it depends on what you're doing in the gym in terms of force development and that kind of thing. And then looking at sports like soccer, tennis, basketball, for me it just goes down to how does your body actually work? Because I've been in the gym back before I kind of got into all this fascia work and and this or that. And I'm deadlifting three plates on each side, doing barbell hip thrust, three 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 like three or four plates on each side, super strong in gym terms. But yet on the field, I've never felt my glutes when I run, even though all these things in the gym are supposed to target your glutes, make your posterior chain more powerful, make it, do all this, all that. But yet I've never felt my glutes on the pitch. And that paradigm shift of saying, okay, how does my brain choose to activate muscles on the pitch? Because obviously that's unconscious. If you're in the gym doing a band warm up to force the glutes to activate in an acute manner, and you basically just make the glute med contract as opposed to the whole glute activating through the fascial inserts, it's a different ball game when you're talking about on the field performance, running, jumping, shooting, because there's a whole different feeling when you shoot a ball and you're quad driven and you have zero uh, glute connection compared to when you have a serious fascial development in the glutes from the feet. Because like in my experience, say like you and me, Zach, are like going out to do like pings for like 40-yard pings, and all you feel is your quad. It's blocky. Then you go out 6 months later and you're doing it, the same exact skill, the same exact movement, and you feel your glutes and your abs. So obviously something under the skin is different. There's no reason that things just change randomly like that. And as we see, all the top athletes of all the sports, they pretty much all have strong glutes. They have the feet that are fascially molded, or they basically have prominent tendons in a way that speaks to a history of being barefoot in their childhood, versus guys that have weak, so-called dysfunctional feet. They can't retract their toes correctly. They can't activate their anterior tibialis tendon. Their arch is basically desensitized. They don't have that connection from the brain down to the plantar fascia. All those things that I just mentioned, just in the gym, I don't see solutions for. And that's for me is what translates to elite performance on the pitch. And so, I've been through like I've worked with dozens of gym trainers, and I've I've tried all the methods, and what I'm doing now, of course, isn't perfect. I'm always developing. I mean, right now I'm doing a life coaching cert for a new other thing that we'll be talking about in a few months. And so I think you always have to push the boundaries of what you think you know. And for me, it's always a hallmark of someone that I it's always a hallmark of someone I don't want to listen to when they're on the same thing for 5 years, you know? Because why aren't you pushing the limits of your knowledge, you know?
Yeah, man. And so there's a lot of things that I agree with that. Like I went through a lot of the same experience of when I was in high school. Like I got into weight training and stuff like that when I was also trying to go play college. And I think what the experience that a lot of guys have and the experience that I had was the mantra in strength and conditioning is supposed to be like bigger, faster, stronger. Like that's our goal that
Yeah.
we try and make people. And what I experienced was much more of a bigger, stronger, slower. And I think a lot of guys experience that as well. Um, but then as I've started to kind of evolve, get into more of like the ATG stuff, the knees over toes stuff, like I'm wondering if from your experience, from my experience, if there's potentially just a difference in the actual like application and stuff like that. I've heard Chong talk about like getting up to like a good squat, a good deadlift and things like that, and not having that carry over to the pitch as well. And I just wonder if that just means that there's the style of training, the way that we were training, if that's done in a way that's not making us a better athlete, but if there is still an ability to. So like most classic strength and conditioning, like we spend a ton of time powering up like the hips, the glutes, the low back, but then they do very little through the feet. And so we build up a lot of these like imbalances where we're stronger in one area of the body than we are in the other. And that can lead to a lot of injuries or just lack of performance or different things like that. And so while I agree that a lot of times, even you'll see some of the best athletes in the gym and like a weight room are rarely the best athletes on the field and vice versa. I wonder if that just means if there's some element of that development piece as well, but if that also just means we're using the wrong tests. Like to me, like a barbell squat and a barbell deadlift, like they're not stuff that I use a ton of either. Like I don't think they're incredibly conducive to helping guys be better athletes. Um, and I think there's a lot to be said for the natural development that you talk about through childhood. But the two issues that I see guys running into with that is one, if they're you're in my age, like what do we've missed that childhood window, so trying to play a little
Mhm.
bit of catch up. But then also I think that style, that philosophy works really well for the guys that you talk about, like the naturals, the guys that I would also say like and put in that category of have a higher genetic potential or higher genetic ceiling. I'm actually curious on your opinion on like kind of genetics and stuff like that as well. But then I also wonder like what about the runs, the guys that do all of that, but I feel like there are some guys that are just naturally slow or naturally less athletic and that sort of thing. And so if there couldn't
Mhm.
be benefit from a more precise way of training that can build up the tendons, the joints, the connective tissue, as well as the muscle that can make us stronger without necessarily making us stiffer. And so that's just kind of been what I've been interested in exploring. Maybe that's is or is not a thing, but just I'm think it's interesting or worth asking that question as opposed to just throwing it out entirely. Just because I have seen in certain situations, I have seen some value from it. Myself, I've increased my athleticism quite a bit from my college days to now, doing a different style of training. I've helped other people do that as well. But then you do a good job in pointing out a lot of the videos and stuff like that that are coming out of like Barcelona and Real Madrid, if they're like strength and conditioning and stuff like that they're doing, and it's head scratching to say the least. It's some interesting stuff. So I don't know if a long-winded way of I don't know if they're saying there's a question in there, but just kind of my thoughts on feeling like there's potential in there as well. And so I guess maybe how I'll wrap that up into an actual question is I think you make a very good distinction of there being differences in like movement quality and stuff like that between some of these guys that just move well on the pitch. They have this natural fluidity, athleticism, and stuff like that as well that allows them not to be as stiff and clunky as you see a lot of gym
Mhm.
guys becoming. But if I just think of track and field specifically, I think of these like high level sprinters and stuff like that, and they have a lot of this fluidity, rhythm, timing, coordination, and stuff like that from sprinting so much. But there's also a huge power element, a huge power component. These guys are extremely explosive as well. And so that's where
Mhm.
I just wonder if from this purely kind of fascial movement based kind of approach or training or system, do we still develop that to the same degree? If you look at these like 100-meter sprinters and stuff like that, most of them can move insane weights in like a quarter squat or something like that, just because it's very CNS driven and that sort of thing. And so that's where I wonder is if we can get that quality without wrecking them in the weight room, like is there a way to do both
Mhm.
of those? And so that's I guess where I'm coming from, and just kind of curious on your opinion in that sense.
Well, I mean, my approach in that vein is basically is unlock more of their body through the fascia, through their hands, through their tongue, which is like some kind of some forms of breath work. Basically, just unlock more of their natural ability to move, and then go move, go do your sprint training, go do stadiums, go do hills, all the different uh all the different track workouts that they do. um, Obviously, there's different forms of track workouts across the country from different coaches in that world. I mean, like there's one guy that I like a lot named Tony Francis, I believe is his
Tony
name.
Holler.
Yeah, that's right, Tony
Yeah,
Holland.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, I think he's against most gym work as well,
yeah.
and kind of he's very he's very focused on the idea. Well, I want to move fast, so we're not going to move slow, which then obviously he infers when you use weights, you're moving slower because there's more weight, just based on basic physics. And for some things, I agree in that paradigm, that understanding. Like, yeah, if you want to move fast, you have to actually push the limits of your ability to move fast, and that means go and do sprint work. That means going to do stadiums and hill sprints and all those different kinds of track workouts. Uh, but I mean, ultimately, you have certain application of the ATG system to help with injuries. I don't think there's no value there. Know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like in terms of getting that like max output of power. I mean, hitting a football like hitting a football accurately like 100 yards is not easy. That takes a lot of power and precision. And I see some people, maybe not in our world, but in the normal gym world, it's like their only understanding of power is like lifting weights. Where like if you've ever had to sprint like a 400-meter lap under a minute, that takes some power. Or you know like we mentioned, having to strike a football, top corner from like 40 yards, that takes extreme amount of coordination and power and precision. Everything has to be working right. And that's actually one of the things that I wanted to mention is this idea of strength, the the coordination aspect of it, the CNS. People don't understand that like half of strength is just coordination. Your brain being able to think about it and do it in a coordinated manner. And people have kind of lost that perspective nowadays from all the bodybuilding, from all the gym work, like the mainstream gym work. They don't realize that strength is a skill, power is a skill, and you have to kind of develop it in a way that keeps the brain center place.
I do like that line. I think I've heard Keegan mention that too. That strength is a skill. I do think that is a piece of it that's undervalued and underrated, and that's why I don't use as much things like a barbell deadlift or a barbell squat with a lot of my soccer guys. And if you test them on that, people will think, oh, they're weak, and a lot of times no, it's just that they don't have the skill around that specific movement, which is fine
Mm,
because the carryover is going to be less than maybe with other things.
mm,
But then that's where I'm like, can we still build some of those qualities, those attributes of that strength and power without messing guys up? So I think we're in honestly, I think we're in very similar opinions of what we value and what we look for in terms of some of those qualities and just slightly different angles of how we approach it. In terms of like kind of seeing a lot of the faults with a lot of the traditional kind of strength and conditioning, bodybuilding type approach, and how that's kind of failing and letting down a lot of people. Um, I come back to as well when you talk about power and that sort of thing, and how with football and with rugby, like American football and with rugby, how there's that element of moving another person, and so having to need that higher degree of strength basically and pushing against somebody else. But I do
mm,
also think about the idea. Louis Simmons has the quote that all movement starts with overcoming inertia. And so the idea that to move ourself, to move our body, be able to very quickly explode, decelerate, everything like that. There are high degrees of forces and power that go with that. And so just taking that element into consideration, because I think if we compared the purely physical qualities of like NFL guys versus Premier League guys, and we just put them in like a combine, 5, 10, 5, whatever it is, like I think most people would agree that the NFL guys are going to outshine the Premier League guys, and most of this shows those physical qualities, those speed, quickness, agility, and things like that. And so when I think about something like that, I think there is value in having that, again, that strength and power. These guys are even bigger guys. These guys are doing a lot more weight training stuff than a lot of these Premier League guys. And not that we need the Premier League guys to be that size, because I don't think it would be conducive, but that they're able to display some of those qualities with that amount of training without being destroyed. And I guess that's just one of the places where I think we differ some. Is I heard you bash a lot of strength training, not just from the sense of being un not valuable, but also
Mhm.
causing a lot of injuries. And again, I think that's true in a lot of senses. I think just with you and me, I see a lot of your stuff, and I'm like, yes, but I always like want to add like a comma in there, and you just
Yeah,
put
yeah.
things as like a hard stop, and maybe that's like an easier point to get your point across. But that's, I just think, the why we're having this conversation is just to be able to flesh out some of those nuances and some of those situations where it may be more appropriate than others.
Yeah, on your mention of like kind of testing or comparing American football players to soccer players around the world, and the differing qualities of their physiques, you have to look at the demands of their sport. And in soccer and in football, you're not able to carry that much mass around. You'll basically sweat it off. And
No, 100%.
in American football, every play lasts what, 5, 10 seconds maybe. So the their physiques are a reflection of the demands of their sport, in terms of the higher power output and the less need for stamina, the less need for I guess strength, stamina, or uh muscle endurance, because you like all you have to do is just win that play, then you rest, and then the next play. So their physiques reflect their sport, honestly. So it's like
No, I
if
agree.
you
Good.
yeah, go ahead.
So no, it's like I agree with that 100%. That's why I was saying like I'm not expecting football, like Premier League football, to look like NFLers. Like you said, that's not something that's
Mm,
going to be conducive. But the points that I've heard you talk a lot about, like strength and size and stuff like that, does not necessarily equate to speed. And I
mm,
think that's true. It's not a given. It's not a one for one. If I get bigger, stronger, I will get faster. But I do think it's true sometimes. And that's more of like these NFL guys are bigger and stronger and more explosive. Obviously, the fitness, the conditioning, like the stamina is not there because it's not conducive to the sport. But that's
mhm,
really just the point that I want to illustrate with that, is that there can be a role of strength and size making these guys faster and more explosive, that obviously our Premier League guys are not going to have from that stamina standpoint. But that's
mhm.
just the point that I was trying to illustrate with that.
Yeah, well, I think actually in the track and field world, there's a good dichotomy of, like, you see the cross country runners, obviously they're very skinny, and because that's what is uh efficacious for that competition. And one of the big things that people nowadays have almost lost touch with is that you don't have to, the only way to, like, the gym is not the only way to gain muscle. Like, if you're have great health and you're a serious track sprinter and you eat well and you sleep well, you will gain muscle because that is conducive to the demands that you're putting on yourself, because of the high output and the very minimal need for stamina. And basically the effects on the muscle when you move at such higher outputs versus a football match where you play hour and a half all the time, that stimulus does not create that the same kind of muscle development. So I think that that's the big thing, is like you can develop the same like size and aesthetic in the gym as you can on the track, but the functionality is totally uh worlds apart.
I think that is a good distinction, and something that I think you've made before, but is one that is good to emphasize. Is yeah, like a lot of younger guys will see the physique of yeah, like a track and field guy, Usain Bolt, and be like, I want to look like that, or if I look like that, I will be able to run like that. And yeah, that's a kind of jump in logic is not necessarily always the case. And how you develop something, I do think that there's a very valid point to that. And like you even touched on with the NFL guys, of there being an ideal physique for an ideal like kind of figure basically for your sport, whatever that is. If you're going to be in rugby, you need to be gigantic. If you're going to be in cross country, it's not going to fly. And so like kind of what is that ideal kind of body type look like for the physique, the sport, the position that you're trying to do. But then even maybe to that point, not chasing that physique as much, of trying to just copy it in the gym, maybe not giving you those same qualities that you would want it to on the field. So then I want to kind of get into a little bit more of the fascial stuff, because I have some questions around that in terms of development. You also have talked about it a lot in terms of like the proprioceptive component, which is some of the stuff. There's still a lot of research that's coming out on it. Robert Schleip, somebody who's super interesting, and it is a very interesting kind of new frontier of stuff that we're still kind of learning about. So the concept of it, I think, makes a lot of sense. The training of it and some of the application of it is where I have some questions basically. So you've mentioned some of the skill component of being more fascially driven, or having that in a like a healthier state, basically, having a correlation to actual technical skill, your ability to control the ball, just do different things like that. So I was wondering if you could elaborate on that first.
Well, basically, Dr. Robert Schlepp talks a lot about how fascia is the body's biggest sensory organ, and fascia has 10 times the amount of proprioceptors than muscle does. And how in the mainstream we have this kind of myth of muscle memory, and I've always questioned that. I've always been like, okay, where does that come from? And then of course, like years later, it comes out that really the memory is in the fascia, and it's because, like I just mentioned, it has 10 times the amount of proprioceptors. And of course, for example, on the skin, on the arch, you have tens of thousands of touch receptors, which is how your brain absorbs information from the ground, which then dictates, okay, what muscles activate to keep me from falling over, so I walk, so I can jump, so I can turn around, so I can pass the football. And that was one of my big transformations, is when you go from being muscle driven to a bit more fascial driven, the the skill component, your touch, your ability to control a ball, just your coordination permanently develops. And basically you're just kind of nourishing your brain, like your nervous system didn't have access to all of its sensory application as it was. And so that's a big part for that's a big part for me, for the fascial system as well, and this kind of training. And like you were saying, there are a bunch of people in the so-called fascia world that talk about fascia training. And even for me, I see most of the things, I'm like that doesn't actually work. Like I like like I tried that. That's stupid.
So then with that, I'll stay on the skill component first, because on the one hand, it does kind of make sense. I've heard the proprioceptive piece of how it's such like a sensory organ, essentially, is what he calls it. And so that would then make sense of just more fine motor skills, like the ability to just have more precision with something like controlling a football and that sort of thing. So then if somebody was some of these more natural athletes, like you talk about, if they're more fascially driven, then they're going to be more sensitive. They'll have more control. But then where I get confused with that, and my question with that is then, why does that not translate, or shouldn't that translate over to other skills, other things as well? Shouldn't they just be more naturally, like just natural athletes? And so the reason that I asked that, or like the question around that, is like, if you I've seen a video of they put a basketball in Mbappe and Neymar's hands, and they look awful. They look atrocious. And maybe like it would just come with time, right? They've never practiced like holding a basketball or whatever it is. But it
Yeah.
just still made me wonder of the a lot of these guys, are they not just have like an affinity for the game itself? Like, is Messi not somebody who was just born to play football? If he'd had the exact same environment growing up, if he developed the same way physically, fascially as he had, but he was a tennis player, would he have developed to that same degree? And so that's just where I wonder about like that's how does that skill component carry over? Like I'm quite sure I'm a better basketball player than Neymar and Mbappe, but I could never
Mhm.
touch what they do on the field. So like, am I more fascially? You know what I mean? Like that's just where
Yeah.
my
I
thought process goes with that.
I think more or less my answer is yes. I think those guys, if they wanted to, like, of course, Neymar's born in Brazil. Basketball is not a big sport there. He's not very tall. So is his profile conducive to basketball? Not so much. He's very skinny. But uh in terms of uh skill acquisition, I think that's where the fascia comes in. Their ability to learn new skills like basketball and tennis and ping pong, I think, is way faster than someone who doesn't have their same physical qualities. One of the big things that I've always noticed in myself and my clients and and like stories of my clients and their teammates is the guys who are quote unquote more of naturals that have more of these that have more of these fascial driven qualities when they're out injured or they're on vacation and they come back and they haven't uh touched the football for a while, they don't feel rusty. They don't lose what they had, quote unquote.
Muscle memory.
Yeah, they don't lose it.
Yeah.
And so that's what I've seen in myself going from being muscle driven. Oh, it's like if I don't do my ball drills every day for half an hour, the following day I'll be rusty. But then it's like once you come across that spectrum to being more fascial driven, it's like I can rest for 3 days and then on Monday my touch is better, even though I haven't trained. And it's because there's a whole different process happening under the skin. Skill acquisition in the brain is is basically unlocked. It's exponentially uh, kind of ready. It's like enabled. Where when you're muscle driven and the feet are basically uh, numb or mute or deaf or blind, don't have the sensory application, you're not getting that environmental information from the body or from the environment, excuse me, to nourish itself to develop the skill itself. So it's like, you know, I had a player that plays in Denmark for FC Michelin, and it's like, yeah, there's this guy from Africa on our team, like one of the best players. He'd be injured for 3 weeks, not touch a ball, come back the first day, and he's like better than before. like like his touch is better than my touch after I've trained every day for a month. You know, so it's like, how does that happen?
Yeah, like that
That's
old expression, like class is permanent kind of thing of these old legends that are 45 years old and still killing it on the just on the touchline that are coaching now and stuff like that.
that's
Um,
right.
it makes sense, and I want to kind of believe and buy into that. I guess though I still get hung up. I would expect some of these guys to maybe have slightly higher base in some of these other ones, but maybe I've also grown up playing a little bit more basketball than they have and that sort of thing. But the idea of it being a like the potential for learning or the rate of learning being quicker does make some sense. I'm interested in, and again, I know this is stuff that's still new. We're still learning about. So how the physical proprioception and skill element combines with more of like the actual neurological skill learning or just motor development. So the interplay there. But again, stuff that's still new and still coming out. Um,
Well,
so it
yeah.
is. Go ahead.
Don't get me wrong. I still think these guys from Brazil and France, like they are still. One could argue they're still too specialized. In Brazil, how much like are they really playing basketball and tennis and ping pong and these other things? Like in America, at least back in the day in America, we still have this kind of tradition of baseball, football, hockey, basketball. And it
Stalker when they're
being,
5.
yeah, exactly, like it being normal that in high school, like you do track and soccer and basketball and tennis. Like in Europe, I think especially now with, now it's a huge Goliath of a business. All these academies around Europe, once they're 13 years old, they're put into it. Well, I mean, okay, like once they're 8 years old, they're like in an academy, and how much, what kind of window do they get to actually explore themselves and play other sports? Not very much,
It's a good
especially not,
good.
especially nowadays. Like I think it's different nowadays versus even 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Like at an academy like Ajax right now, if you're 12 years old, if you're 14 years old, are you allowed to play basketball? Are you allowed to play ping pong? I mean, okay, I guess maybe ping pong for 5 minutes after training at in the clubhouse, but like the whole multi-sport athlete is dying in kind of our modern world.
That's a good point. Yeah, it is kind of like an American idea more than anything. It's much more common here. Could that be part of the reason you think somebody like Neymar keeps running into like injury problems? Like I know that may be a loaded question, but that's another one of the points that I've been interested in is if all of like if being more of these like fascially driven, fascially dominant, if that makes you more protected from injury, why are some of these guys the ones that are getting injured first if they're all doing the same strength training? Nobody's assuming Neymar's spending extra time in the gym, just what he's like forced to be doing. So I'm just
Yeah, yeah.
curious on that as well.
Well, I mean, I'm asked this question a lot, and my answer is always the same. And people like to forget that Neymar, has had a lot of serious contact injuries. Uh, Not to mention other environmental influences like his poor lifestyle and nutrition that can leave him more susceptible to ankle sprains, which then an ankle sprain gets him gets him put into the world of rehab, which in my opinion the rehab causes more issues. It's a domino effect because the initial, let's say, minor injury gets them onto a program where they're being treated, and that treatment can be focusing on the symptoms. It can be, oh, we got to increase the ankle mobility, we got to do this, do that, we got to use like stem and try and shock their muscles and do these different gym things that don't actually understand what makes Neymar who he is, what makes him actually athletic. So then that creates a cycle, which I call whack-a-mole therapy, where it's like a minor ankle sprain from a bad tackle starts it off, and then over the years, Neymar had that thing where I think the guy from Colombia like broke
He
his
like broke his back. Yeah,
like
right.
yeah,
Yeah,
like
it took
like
like
like broke his back. In my opinion, even with all the best doctors over there in Brazil, I'm sure they have the best, but I just think I would I'd wager all my money that he has a lot of like scar tissue under the skin, a lot of muscle trauma where certain areas of his body are still like clenched in that protective state and haven't let go because mainstream rehab, and I say mainstream, and that means Real Madrid, Barcelona, mainstream rehab, but just like but just on like steroids at that level, it still doesn't look at the body in the way that we're talking about in terms of the emotional trauma, the muscle trauma, scar tissue. Maybe they'll try to inject some uh some acids into the fascia to try and help with the scar tissue, but like these things don't actually fix his underlying issue. So then, because of his natural ability, because of his natural talent, because he's Neymar, so obviously he'll survive and he'll still be able to like Neymar at Neymar at like 80 Neymar at 85% is still better than most pros. So he'll still do well. Like PSG will buy him from Barca, and then Saudi will buy him from PSG because he's still Neymar. But in my opinion, all the underlying issues are still there because he got tossed into that cycle of whack-a-mole therapy. It goes on and on and on and on with all the mainstream therapies, and it doesn't actually fix the root cause. So then basically he's just a uh, ticking time bomb, and then now we saw it with the ACL tear.
That does, it makes sense with him specifically. I could definitely see that. Like you said, he's had that laundry list, and if there's a problem with that system in the first place, that just getting recycled through that over and over is not going to help. I do think you see that, not just like he's just one example, but I do think you see cases of that with. I mean, there's injuries at every level and stuff like that, but more of these like kind of fascially driven guys than you would expect that are starting to pop up with that sort of thing. So it's just something that I do wonder about in general. um in terms of the development and stuff like that as well. So you talk about the, so like again, just with somebody like Neymar, like the environment and that tissue quality, like being more of like fascial driven and stuff like that, and growing up in that more natural, like playful environment where you're able to develop skills and stuff like that. If that's the key to what made him successful, I'll, that makes sense to me. But then I also wonder, like, why is there only one Neymar? Like, I know there's Brazilian kids and stuff like that coming up, but for every one of him, there's still 100, 1,000, however many that like that never make it out of the favelas. And so is that like, that's where I wonder of, is it purely the environment and playing like that, or is there also like a natural affinity? Like we haven't touched on it yet, but I know you smiled when I mentioned genetics and stuff like that earlier. So I think there's something you had to say there. But what makes him different from the 10 other kids that grew up in the exact same neighborhood as him that didn't make it out? That's one of the things that I think about a lot.
Well, I mean, on that token, I mean, Barcelona just bought like another like Brazilian like wonder kid, Vitor Roque, I think it is. I'm not sure if I said it, if I said his name correctly. And obviously, like Real Madrid has Vinicius, Rodrigo. Now they have Endrick. Like, like Brazil's pumping out quite a bit of talent. Uh, and whether they become, Neymar's level, I mean, one could argue that Vinicius is very close. Uh, is kind of, it's a thin margin, and it includes luck, and it includes having a good team around them. In terms of, Neymar went to Barcelona with like Messi and Suarez, so like he was propelled. Imagine if Neymar was at like a different, I don't know, if like he went to Chelsea, like like Chelsea at the age of 18, we'd probably see a whole different, Neymar. So, and then on a token, Chelsea, they've bought kids like Neymar from Brazil every summer, and then it's like one gets injured, one they loan to Belgium, one becomes good. It kind of, at that point, I think there is a proven concept that Brazil is pumping out Neymar level talents every year. But to your question about, okay, why does this guy make it versus the five other ones on the same neighborhood? There certainly is a token of genetics, but I'll say more so in a way of epigenetics, of how their environment pulls the trigger on what they're given from their parents. Like, for example, if their father was also his whole life on the court playing sports, and he's developed some of this fascial functionality and a higher level of skill acquisition, coordination, power output, muscle composition, I'm going to argue those things are going to be passed down, uh, are going to be passed down to Neymar. And then yes, some can argue, oh well, then he's just lucky. Well, no, he's not lucky. Like, his dad put in the work, and then his dad found a beautiful wife who also maybe had, good health going on, and they produced an amazing offspring, and then you have Neymar. And then on top of that, that's just kind of like the cards he was dealt. From there, it's the environment, and plus there's so many things, even just like parenting, in terms of how his parents talk to him growing up. What kind of words do they use around the household? Is he instilled with a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset? Do they have drug problems in that family? Do they have alcohol problems in the like? There's so many things that I think are not necessarily, that are not out of your control, that are going to influence whether or not you have a name, or you have uh, just some kid.
Yeah, I'll take that. It's just funny just because it's, I mean, it's a deeper conversation about it, just like what's, how do you identify what makes somebody good versus somebody not? And so like within the fascial space, and even we haven't touched on like GOTA that much, but looking at, you guys are looking at what's their fascial quality? I'll make up that term for lack of a better one. Like what's their movement quality like in terms of these like go to attributes and stuff like that. But then like, okay, so you take two guys that both have these attributes, what separates them? So like the example that I've thought of a lot is you talk a lot about like Phil Foden as one who shows like a ton of that like spiraling dynamic and that sort of thing, a lot of that fascial
Mhm.
quality. But then I would say like if you compare him and Messi, I would say he shows even more of that's like spiraling rotational movement quality than
Yeah.
somebody like Messi. And he's a phenomenal player, but he's also not on that level. So it's just like what's the distinction with there with the fascial stuff? Like I know you have the markers of like feeling quads versus feeling glutes, feeling abs, like that sort of thing. And not to discredit that, it's just it feels a little subjective. You know what I mean? It's just like kind of hard to quantify. And maybe it's just something that we're not there yet. You sound like you got something to say. Go.
No, I'm just gonna say, like, uh, quantification, of course, is never easy because we're working, you know, holistically. We're trying to treat the body as opposed to, you know, kind of pump science out of our ass. And when we talk about fascial development, we can say, you know, basically it's like an onion. You know, there's many layers to there's many layers to an onion. The once you're glute dominant, it's not like yes or no. It's a spectrum. You can keep developing it more and more and more and more and more. So I could argue that Messi has a better, or I guess had, well, we could say has a better fascial connection than Phil Foden. But again, I mean, I don't know Messi. I haven't talked to him. I haven't, you know, done my diagnosis or whatever. Uh, but then on top of that, you know, having the base level uh, ability to move is kind of like the foundation. Then on top of that, it's the game and how that fascia is molded to the sport you play. You know, Phil Foden wasn't getting as many minutes coming up as Messi was at Barcelona. Messi was like starting when he was 18, 19 years old. Phil Foden was still on the bench, like still not getting as many minutes on the first team under Pep as maybe he would have as maybe he would have liked. And so that game development at that age, I think, is very important. Like from 18 to 22, the brain is really like is the brain is in its last it's in its last phase of development. It's really kind of maturing. And if you can play a lot of high quality minutes, then that's the biggest bang for your buck as far as how how a player develops over a 20 plus year career.
As a side note with that, do you think that's one of the issues with the American soccer compared to Europeans is that they're going into an academy at that age and we're going into a classroom and like those prime years of like 18 to 22? Like I look at that as one of the reasons the US is still behind from like a national team perspective, but I'm just curious in your thoughts on that.
Oh yeah, I mean, U.S. college soccer is terrible. Um, it's that and it's an absolute joke in terms of wanting to talk about soccer performance and like development. I mean, we have a 2.5 month season, and we play every Wednesday, Saturday, and then you have a a coach in the gym who's an ex powerlifter who's never played your sport telling you like what to do, and then you have classes and you're up till 2 a.m. doing assignments and doing homework, and then you have to go sit in a chair half the day, and then you're on an 8 hour bus ride up to Sacramento from Orange County. Like it's just like it's the exact opposite of how you make talent. But yeah, that kind of goes back to how soccer's not a priority in the U.S. college system, and it's different from basketball, and it's different from basketball and American football, where when you're 16 or when you're 16 years old, 17 years old, 18 years old, potentially you could be ready to play at the highest level in soccer. In American football and basketball, that's usually not the case, even if you're super talented, just because of muscle,
Physicality has to develop. Yeah.
yeah, muscle uh muscle maturation, or basically your the muscle development maturing. And that also is obvious, that also is more obvious in rugby, where it takes even longer to have the muscle development um to get into like senior rugby. And so yeah, but that's a big thing. But the cool thing in America, we are seeing a lot of more youngsters going to Europe, a lot of more youngsters getting signed to homegrown contracts. And so there is some hope, I guess we can say, some potential, but there is still the main pipeline of players going from academy in the MLS into college D1, and they play for 2.5 months, and then they have off season for the rest of the year, and they kind of have this like purgatory of having practice and then doing fitness and then lifting, and then and then there's a random 1 month a season in the summer with different teams. It's like, it makes zero sense in terms of actual development.
Damn, I was critical of it before, but when you laid it out like that, yeah, it's even worse than I had anticipated.
Yeah.
I want to be mindful of your time. I still have a couple other questions I had to ask you if you still got some time.
Yeah, sure, man, go ahead.
So I'm curious about the. We've talked a lot about muscle. We talked a lot about fascia, but the like obviously to make this all holistic and in terms of like where the rubber hits the road, it's actually like the integration between the two, right? And so
Yeah.
fascia has contractile elements, but it's more so, from my understanding, of something that's like reflexive, like a tendon, where it's like elastic, like storage and release, basically. So it's going to kind of synchronize and then kind of just release the energy that's originally coming from like muscular contraction would be my assumption there. So I'm just curious on your thoughts of what's the relationship between the two. Like, what role does the muscle play? What percentage of impact does it have? Not that we can give them like a hard number, but it seems like the relationship between the two would be most kind of useful, or be something that would be interesting to explore.
Yeah, fair enough. uh for me, it's honestly super funny, because obviously on social media I mention fascia a lot, and then I get these random comments. They're like, is muscle still needed? And I go, well, no, no, of course it's needed. Like muscle has a role to play, or else it wouldn't be there. But in my opinion, and in my perspective, and all the work I've been doing over the years, muscle isn't very smart. Muscle kind of just does what it's told. In a way, it's not gonna think for itself. And fascia is the network. It is the ecosystem that muscle lives within. uh, One could argue that basically your whole body is one big fascial suit, and that muscles exist inside pockets of one fascial web, as opposed to the mainstream kind of thinking, where it's like, oh, like muscle, 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 and then fascia is just this like extra like filler tissue that has no functionality. Well, it's like the whole nervous system, all the lymph and the nerves flow and go through your fascia. So if your fascia is under nourished, is under uh, stimulated, then how is the muscle going to be able to receive messages from the brain to coordinate and to activate, or and to contract and relax as it needs to, in an effortless manner, to be a good athlete? Because that's one of the worst things that I found for myself, at least, is if you're stuck if you're stuck in a chronic state of muscle contraction, your muscles can never really learn to relax fully, and that hurts recovery a lot. You don't get enough blood flow into the muscles well, certain muscles are stuck in this kind of semi-contracted state because of injury, because of emotional trauma. For some reason, your body has chosen to keep this muscle clenched to protect you from some kind of trauma that it thinks is still there.
Got it. So with the idea being from like a development standpoint of like take care of the fascial properties, make sure it's developed well, like, and then do the activity that you want to do, and the muscle will almost kind of develop as a byproduct or in response to that.
Yeah, I think like the big the main metaphor that I use is like, in a car, you have your turbo and the engine. For me, the engine is the fascia, and and the muscles are the turbo. And most people, like, they're relying on their turbo, which is a very fast way for a car to break down. And their engine is basically underutilized. It's not performing optimally, and it's not doing its job. And so, and like we kind of covered earlier with looking at with looking with looking at the physiques of rugby, uh, American football, soccer, we see that when all those guys across the board, they're all fascially well built, but then the muscle develops in response to the demands of their sport. Some more than others. And so, if you take care of your fascia, the muscles will improve on their own in the way they're needed to, in that kind of natural self organizing way, without having to kind of micromanage specific muscles or muscle groups in the gym doing certain exercises.
Are there ways to train the fascia while also training, like if we have more of like a workout in the gym, basically that can have more of a fascial component? Like I've heard again, like Robert Schleip talking about the ways that we stimulated the most being like kind of bouncing movements, but then also stretching movements. And so then like I can't help but think about something like again coming back to ATG where there's such an emphasis on strength at end ranges of motion, and especially something like a Jefferson curl where you're kind of getting into that entire fascial back line, or even something like a sissy squat where you're getting into that stretching, that pulling feeling. Is that
Mhm.
not going to be a way that may have at least more of a fascial component than your leg extensions and your curls and things like that?
Well, usually just across the board in general, you'll be able to activate the fascia easier when you have less weight and you're moving slower and smoother. So what happens is when you add weight to the equation, in order to get to the fascia to activate it directly, you have to have a higher level of tension in the fascial system already pre-existing. Because then the more muscle you add to the equation, you have to have more fascial tension to compensate. If you don't, then your body will lean to activating muscle directly because in that scenario, your brain is just trying to help you accomplish that exercise, and your brain doesn't care about, oh, what's the best long-term thing for my development as a football player. It's just thinking, okay, in this exercise, I have to lift this weight, and so what's the best way to do it? And so in that short-term scenario, it's muscle, and it's kind of like the path of least resistance. And so that's why when we start in my system, it's non-weighted. There's not things at there's not things at full range of motion because when you have that full flexion, it's also harder to reach the fascial system. And then so once you build that up, then that once you build that up to a point, then there's application to get to like a full stretch, a full flexion, add more weight, where you're able to maintain some of that fascial activation and not kind of go around the fascia and get the muscle directly.
And then, so the last couple of things that I was interested in is one is your kind of personal experience with this. Like, I've gone having gone from more of the like traditional strength and conditioning, powerlifting type training, and then into the system that you developed. Like, what has been your experience personally? But then
Mhm.
also, like, I can't the one of the things that I still get hung up about a little bit is that with if I oversimplify things, we're trying to replicate the results that some of these pro guys have gotten doing things that they didn't do. Like obviously like doing things differently. And so that's just where like trying to, I mean, I guess that's what we're all trying to do, not just your system, but even like strength
Mhm.
training and in general and everything like that. And so just how can we be confident that if they got there differently, that we can get there using a completely different approach.
Mhm. Well, basically, the way I talk about things is that we are recreating what made them who they are. And this natural ability to move, being athletic, being fascial driven, having functional feet, this is what we're all born with. And you have to foster in childhood or else you lose it. All these guys who we are trying to copy or become whatever, they fostered it in childhood for one reason or another. And for those of us who haven't as well or have but then got injured along the way, we have to do things to recreate that functionality that they have naturally. And that's basically like the premise is when guys say, "Oh, but Messi didn't do like tower attractions." Like, yes, I get it. Of course he didn't. Like, he's a natural. He just plays a sport. He's barefoot. But he didn't ruin his foot function when he was 3 years old. So he has the toes retracted. He has the arch basically functional, has the anterior tibialis tendon working as it should unconsciously. But you don't. You aren't Messi. So we have to do things to recreate that functionality to make you built like him. And then like I said before, if you do things to break down that natural functionality that Messi has, that makes him Messi, that Neymar has, that makes him Neymar, then of course you're going to have issues because you just ruined what made you good. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you asked about my like personal experience. I mean, uh, basically, playing D1 soccer, playing like pro soccer like before in Europe, I was always like the strongest guy in the gym, but I was never the best player on the pitch. And I always had to kind of do more effort to keep up when guys I felt at least did half the effort, but were still better than me. And then I always was like, okay, like what the hell's going on? Why? Like this makes no sense. And basically, I've had 2 foot fractures, ACL tear, the meniscus re-tear. I've tried so many different things, and I'm always evolving. And now at this point in time, I can say that playing football is so much fun. Running is so much fun because I actually feel more athletic as I'm doing it because my body actually has the glutes involved, actually has the abs involved from a fascial POV. Um, so playing sports, doing activity is actually enjoyable. Working out is enjoyable. Whereas before it was a grind. It was a muscle driven thing where I had to force it just because I'm told that this is what I should be doing. And that, yeah, sure, doing bodybuilding, like you go home, have a pump, hop in the shower, eat some food. Like, yeah, like you feel good from the pump, but it's not a permanent transformation where every single day when you walk around, you feel athletic. And that's the big thing for me is like if your system of training doesn't make you feel athletic, doesn't give you that swagger, which enables your sport to make you more athletic, then that's the problem.
I love it,
And
dude.
yeah.
Well, that's everything that I know we could talk for a little while longer, but that's everything. A lot of the things that I wanted to cover today. So it was really fun to kind of get in and kind of get into some of the nuances that you're not always able to get to on like short form and social media and stuff like that. And so it's cool to see how much stuff that I think we do genuinely agree on compared to more of like kind of nitpicking a little bit on some of the things that we differ on. And so yeah, it's cool to see of how different spaces that we can be in, but still have a lot of the same kind of opinions, same kind of views. So I appreciate you taking the time to come on today and have this conversation and sharing some of your time and your thoughts with us.
Yeah, Zach, my pleasure. And I mean, like we're both football players. We both love the game, and there's a lot of commonalities there. And so I'm happy to come on and talk anytime. And my pleasure.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. I'll take you up on that.
All right, bro. Sounds great.